The Nexus Academy floated in the void between star systems like a monument to organized arrogance, its crystalline spires catching starlight and reflecting it back in patterns that probably meant something profound to someone who cared about such things. For 3 millennia, the galaxy's most promising warriors had come here to learn the ancient arts of combat, presumably because beating each other senseless in new and creative ways was considered the height of cultural achievement. The Academy's founders had built their institution on a simple premise, that the universe could be neatly organized by who could punch whom into submission. This delightfully primitive worldview had somehow evolved into an elaborate caste system where your species' natural advantages determined not just your training regimen, but your cosmic worth. The Krillian battle monks with their 4 arms and chitinous armor naturally occupied the top tier, followed by the Vorthak berserkers, whose idea of strategy was screaming louder than their opponents. Even the diminutive Zephyrians, barely 3 feet tall but capable of moving faster than most eyes could track, commanded more respect than species deemed structurally inadequate for proper warfare. Which brought us to the human. The creature stood in the Academy's receiving chamber, looking remarkably unremarkable among the assembled alien specimens. No natural weapons, no enhanced physiology, no apparent evolutionary gifts for violence. Just standard bipedal design with opposable thumbs and an expression that suggested either profound calm or complete confusion. The intake committee observed this specimen with the sort of polite bewilderment usually reserved for abstract art or tax forms. "This is what Earth sent us." Senior instructor Vixthul's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement or disgust. His species, the hegemony, had conquered half their solar system before they'd figured out agriculture, so his standards for promising recruits ran toward the homicidal. "Are we certain this isn't some form of elaborate jest?" The human's file lay open on the committee's shared display, reading like a catalog of biological mediocrity. Average height, average weight, average every. No recorded feats of strength, no combat experience, no apparent reason why anyone would waste interstellar shipping costs to deliver this particular package to the galaxy's premier fighting institution. "Perhaps," suggested Instructor Kalnet, whose people had evolved from predatory pack hunters, "this is their attempt at stealth warfare. Send us their weakest to lower our guard." The theory might have had merit if the human had shown any sign of being a covert operative. Instead, it simply stood there, occasionally blinking and displaying what appeared to be genuine curiosity about the proceedings. The Academy's behavioral analysts had run preliminary scans, and concluded that the creature was exactly what it appeared to be, spectacularly ordinary. The Academy's hierarchy had been refined over centuries of careful observation and bitter experience. The apex tier housed species capable of solo planetary conquest. The prime tier included those who could at least conquer a continent. The standard tier encompassed beings who might manage a respectable city-state. Below that stretched the auxiliary tier, reserved for species useful primarily for support roles and moral encouragement. The human would be assigned to the remedial tier, a category that hadn't been used in over 2 centuries and existed mainly as a historical curiosity. The Academy's quartermaster had to dust off manuals that predated the current galactic calendar system. While the committee debated placement protocols, the ancient master observed from his private viewing chamber high above the proceedings. The being known simply as the Master had trained at the Academy for longer than some civilizations had existed. His own species had vanished into cosmic history, leaving behind only legends, and this singular individual who had refused every student for the past 3 centuries. The Master watched the human with the sort of attention usually reserved for interesting weather patterns or particularly complex mathematical proofs. Something about the creature's absolute stillness in the face of obvious dismissal had caught his interest, though he couldn't articulate what. The committee reached its inevitable conclusion. The human would be assigned to maintenance duties pending transportation back to Earth, assuming anyone could be bothered to arrange such transport. In the meantime, it could observe training sessions from appropriate distances and perhaps absorb some useful knowledge through osmosis. The Academy's students, representing 47 different species and twice as many combat disciplines, greeted the human's arrival with reactions ranging from confusion to outright mockery. The Krillian battle monks incorporated the human into their meditation exercises as an example of cosmic irony. The Vorthak berserkers used the human's presence as motivation, reasoning that anything capable of producing such weakness must be conquered immediately. The human was assigned quarters in the Academy's service sector, a Spartan facility designed for staff who maintained the equipment and cleaned the training ground. The room contained a sleeping platform, basic sanitation facilities, and a small workstation equipped with various cleaning implements. The human examined these arrangements with the same mild interest it had shown everything else. As the Academy's daily routine continued around this new anomaly, the ancient master made a decision that would have surprised everyone, if anyone had been paying attention to what the ancient master was thinking. For the first time in 3 centuries, he began to watch the training sessions not from his private chamber, but from the observation galleries where the strange little human spent its days learning to operate industrial cleaning equipment. The cosmic joke, as it turned out, was just beginning. 3 weeks into what the Academy generously termed the human's cultural exchange program, the creature had achieved something remarkable: complete invisibility while remaining perfectly visible. The human moved through the Academy's corridors like a ghost with a mop, present but somehow absent from the consciousness of everyone who mattered. The daily routine had crystallized into a masterpiece of systematic dismissal. Dawn brought the human to the primary training halls where it sanitized equipment that beings with natural weapons and armor had somehow managed to contaminate despite their evolutionary advantages. The irony that creatures designed for combat couldn't figure out basic hygiene was lost on everyone except the ancient master, who continued his unprecedented observation routine from the galleries. The Academy's students had organized themselves into what they called excellence clusters, groups of compatible species who trained together in carefully choreographed displays of martial superiority. The Krillian battle monks practiced their 17-form kata with the precision of a religious ceremony, each movement designed to showcase their species' natural advantages while maintaining perfect spiritual balance. Their leader, a particularly imposing specimen named Thexvar, had achieved the rank of prime disciple through a combination of natural talent and the sort of dedication that bordered on the pathological. "Observe the human," Thexvar would announce during breaks, gesturing toward the figure methodically cleaning training mats nearby. A species so poorly designed for conflict that evolution itself gave up halfway through the process. Note how it requires artificial tools to accomplish what our natural gifts achieve effortlessly. The human would glance up briefly, acknowledge the commentary with what might have been a nod, and return to work. This response, or lack thereof, had become a source of considerable frustration among the students who had expected either defiance or dejection. The creature's apparent indifference to their obvious superiority felt almost insulting. The Vorthak berserkers had developed their own relationship with the human, treating it as a living meditation on weakness. Their training philosophy centered on channeling rage into focused destruction, a practice that required constant maintenance of their aggressive mindset. The human's presence served as a reminder of what they fought against: the cosmic tendency toward pacifism and inadequacy. "Look at how it moves," growled Kethmore, the berserkers' pack leader, during one of their evening sessions. "No awareness of threat, no readiness for combat. It exists in a state of perpetual vulnerability." The human had been cleaning the weapons rack nearby, organizing the various implements of destruction with the same methodical attention it brought to every task. When Kethmore spoke, the human paused, considered the berserker's words with apparent interest, then continued working. What the students didn't realize was that the human's cleaning duties provided access to every training session, every technique demonstration, every strategic discussion. While they focused on displaying their superiority, the human observed from a position of complete insignificance. The creature watched the Zephyrians' lightning-fast strikes, the Hegemony's coordinated battle formations, the Krillians' meditative combat flow. It absorbed fighting styles developed over millennia, techniques refined through generations of warfare, strategies that had conquered star systems. The Academy's faculty had initially worried about security concerns, but those fears had evaporated after the first week. The human showed no sign of recording or transmitting information, no apparent ability to comprehend the advanced concepts being demonstrated. It simply cleaned and observed with the same vacant attention it brought to everything else. The Academy's social hierarchy had adapted to include the human as a sort of living benchmark for inadequacy. Students measured their progress not just against their peers but against the absolute standard of evolutionary failure, represented by the maintenance work. Betting pools had emerged around various aspects of the human's continued presence, with odds heavily favoring its departure within the month. The ancient master's continued observation had not gone completely unnoticed. though the students interpreted his presence in the galleries as renewed interest in their training. Several had attempted to catch his attention through increasingly elaborate displays of skill, unaware that his focus remained fixed on the figure with the cleaning supplies. The master had begun to notice things that others missed. The human's positioning during training sessions wasn't random, but optimized for observation. Its cleaning patterns brought it within range of every significant demonstration. Its apparent clumsiness with maintenance equipment masked an efficiency that completed tasks in record time, leaving more opportunity for observation. Most intriguingly, the human had begun to move different. The changes were subtle, almost imperceptible, but the ancient master had spent centuries studying the mechanics of combat. The creature's posture had improved, its balance had shifted, its spatial awareness had sharpened. These weren't conscious adjustments, but the natural result of prolonged exposure to martial excellence. The Academy's evening meal periods provided entertainment in the form of what students called comparative biology discussion. These sessions involved detailed analysis of why certain species had evolved for combat, while others had apparently evolved for irrelevance. The human's presence at these gatherings was tolerated as a form of educational display, a living example of evolutionary inadequacy. The fascinating aspect, explained instructor Vexthul during one such session, is how this species achieved interstellar travel despite obvious limitations. One must assume they developed technology as compensation for biological deficiency. The human sat at the far end of the hall, consuming standard nutrient paste, with the same methodical attention it brought to every activity. Occasionally it would look up from its meal, survey the assembled students with that same mild interest, then return to eat. What none of them realized was that the human's quiet presence had become a constant in their training environment. The creature had achieved something remarkable. It had become part of the Academy's ecosystem, without anyone consciously acknowledging its integration. Students unconsciously adjusted their demonstrations based on the human's position. Instructors timed their lessons around the cleaning schedule, and the entire facility had reorganized itself around this supposedly insignificant presence. The ancient master recognized the signs of something unprecedented developing. In 3,000 years of observing combat training, he had never seen a student learn through such complete immersion in defeat. The human was absorbing knowledge not through instruction, but through absolute humility, gaining understanding not through practice, but through patient observation. As the fourth week approached, the Academy's betting pools had reached record level. The consensus was that the human would finally recognize its inadequacy and request transport home. The creature had shown no signs of improvement, no indication of learning, no evidence of the pride that drove other species to excel. The ancient master alone knew better. The human wasn't learning to fight like the other species. It was learning to fight like itself. The summons arrived on a Tuesday, which seemed inappropriately mundane for what would later be remembered as the moment the universe's understanding of itself shifted slightly off its axis. The human was engaged in the spiritually fulfilling task of scrubbing scorch marks from the advanced combat simulator. When a junior instructor approached with an expression typically reserved for delivering news of galactic significance or particularly complex tax audits, "The ancient master requests your presence," the instructor announced, then paused as if waiting for the human to burst into flames or achieve enlightenment. When neither occurred, he added, "In his private chambers, immediate." The human set down its cleaning implements with the same methodical care it brought to everything else, acknowledged the summons with what might have been a nod, and began walking toward the Academy's most sacred space. The instructor followed at a respectful distance, presumably to ensure the human didn't get lost or accidentally destroy something priceless through proximity. News of the summons spread through the Academy with the speed of gossip traveling through a monastery. Students abandoned their training to gather in corridors and whisper about the impossible development. The ancient master hadn't taken a student in 3 centuries, hadn't shown personal interest in anyone since the last ice age on several planets, and certainly hadn't demonstrated any inclination toward whatever cosmic joke was currently unfolding. The master's private chambers occupied the Academy's highest spire, a space that existed in a state of perpetual twilight regardless of the surrounding stellar activity. The walls were lined with artifacts from combat traditions that had vanished before most current civilizations had discovered fire. Weapons from extinct species hung beside meditation tools, whose purposes had been forgotten by everyone except their sole remaining practitioner. The ancient master sat in the chamber's center, surrounded by the sort of profound stillness that suggested either deep meditation or advanced decomposition. His species had been tall and lean, with features that might have been carved from stone if stone had been capable of developing wisdom. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of millennia and the dry humor of someone who had seen the universe's same jokes repeated across cosmic scales. "Approach," he said without opening his eye. The human walked forward with the same steady pace it used for everything else, stopping at what seemed like an appropriate distance for cosmic conversation. The master opened his eyes and regarded the creature with the sort of attention usually reserved for particularly complex mathematical proofs or wine that had been aging since before the local star formed. "Tell me," the master said, "what you have learned during your time here." The human considered this question with the same thoughtful attention it brought to all inquiries. When it spoke, its voice carried none of the reverence or nervousness that typically characterized interactions with the ancient master. "I have learned that everyone here believes combat is about demonstrating superiority." The master's expression didn't change, but something in the chamber's atmosphere shifted slightly. "And what do you believe combat is about?" "Surviving it." The ancient master had trained warriors from species that conquered galaxies, beings whose natural advantages made them living weapons. Creatures designed by evolution for nothing but conflict. In 3 millennia, none had given him an answer that simple or that correct. The Academy teaches 47 distinct combat disciplines. The master continued, each developed by species with specific evolutionary advantages. Which would you choose to study? The human appeared to give this serious consideration. "None of them." Explain. "Each discipline assumes its practitioners possess advantages I don't have. 4 arms. Natural armor, enhanced speed, heightened senses. Learning to fight like a Krillian when I'm not a Krillian seems impractical." The master leaned forward slightly, displaying more interest than he had shown in anything for several centuries. "Then how would you fight?" "Like a human." The answer hung in the air like a cosmic punchline waiting for someone to understand the joke. The master understood it immediately, which explained why he had spent 3 centuries refusing students who thought combat was about being the best version of someone else instead of the best version of themselves. The Academy operates on the principle that combat prowess determines cosmic hierarchy, the master observed. Your species lacks every advantage that creates such hierarchy. How do you reconcile this contradiction? The human shrugged, a gesture that somehow managed to encompass the entire futility of ranking species by their ability to inflict violence. Maybe the hierarchy is wrong. The ancient master had devoted his existence to combat, had mastered every fighting style developed by 47 different species, had achieved a level of skill that made him a living legend across the galaxy. In all that time, no student had ever suggested that the entire premise of his life's work might be fundamentally flawed. He found the suggestion refreshingly honest. The Academy's traditions require that potential students demonstrate worthiness through an exchange. The master explained, a single combat interaction that reveals essential nature. Are you prepared for such an exchange? The human nodded with the same calm acceptance it had shown everything else. When? Now would be convenient. The master stood, moving with the fluid grace that had made him legendary throughout the galaxy. The human remained still, displaying either profound calm or complete ignorance of what was about to occur. The master couldn't decide which possibility was more intriguing. The exchange requires no preparation, no weapons, no special equipment, the master explained. It simply reveals what each participant brings to the encounter. Are you ready? The human looked around the chamber, taking in the assembled artifacts of countless combat traditions, the weapons that had conquered star systems, the meditation tools that had focused the minds of legendary warriors. Then it looked back at the ancient master and nodded. I'm ready. The master moved to the chamber's center and assumed a stance that incorporated elements from every combat discipline he had mastered. The human remained where it was, hands at its sides displaying either supreme confidence or complete helplessness. Begin. The human didn't move. The master waited, assuming the creature needed time to prepare or perhaps to overcome paralysis brought on by the magnitude of the moment. The human continued not moving. The exchange has begun, the master clarified. I know, the human replied. The master had trained for 3 millennia, had developed reflexes that could respond to threats before they fully materialized, had achieved a level of combat awareness that bordered on precognition. He had never encountered an opponent who treated the beginning of combat as a reason to remain perfectly still. The human stood in the chamber's center, surrounded by the accumulated wisdom of galactic combat traditions, facing the galaxy's most skilled warrior, and appeared to be waiting for something. The master realized with growing fascination that the creature was waiting for him to make the first move. The exchange, it seemed, was about to become very interesting. The ancient master's first strike came with the accumulated wisdom of 3,000 years of combat, a perfect fusion of 47 fighting styles delivered with the precision of a cosmic force. It was beautiful, elegant, and absolutely lethal. It was also completely ineffective. The human wasn't there, not in the dramatic sense of superhuman speed or mystical teleportation, but in the practical sense of having taken exactly one step to the left while the master's devastating attack swept through the space where a normal opponent would have been. The master's strike, designed to end the exchange before it truly began, instead encountered empty air with the sort of anticlimactic finality usually reserved for elaborate plans meeting simple reality. The master recovered instantly, his legendary reflexes already calculating the next 17 moves that would corner and defeat this surprisingly mobile opponent. The human took another step, this time backward, and the master's follow-up combination swept through another patch of unoccupied space. What followed was less a combat exchange than a meditation on the nature of presence and absence. The ancient master unleashed techniques that had toppled governments, combinations that had ended wars, strikes that had redefined entire species' understanding of violence. The human responded by not being where these techniques expected opponents to be. The creature moved with the sort of economy that suggested either profound laziness or perfect efficiency. No wasted motion, no unnecessary flourishes, no dramatic displays of martial prowess. It simply existed in the spaces between the master's attacks, like water finding the gaps in a stone wall. The Academy's entire population had somehow materialized in the master's chamber, cramming themselves into observation galleries that hadn't been designed for spectators. The sight of their supposedly inadequate maintenance worker engaging the galaxy's most skilled warrior in single combat had created the sort of cognitive dissonance usually reserved for discovering that mathematics was actually optional. "This is impossible," whispered Fexvar, the Krillian battle monk, whose four-armed combat style had been considered the pinnacle of martial evolution. "The human possesses no training, no natural advantages, no weapon." "Perhaps," suggested Kethmore, the Vorthok berserker whose rage-focused techniques had conquered 3-star systems. "The master is toying with it before delivering the final strike." The ancient master, meanwhile, was experiencing something unprecedented in his 3-millennium career: complete frustration. Every technique he employed, every strategy he implemented, every adaptation he made to counter the human's movement patterns, resulted in the same outcome. The human wasn't there. The creature's approach to combat appeared to be based on the radical premise that the best way to win a fight was to not participate in it while somehow remaining engaged. It dodged without seeming to dodge, evaded without apparent effort, and generally existed in a state of not quite conflict that made the master's legendary skills remarkably irrelevant. "Stand still," the master commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to having reality rearrange itself according to his preferences. "Why?" the human asked, continuing to not be where the master's next attack landed. It was a reasonable question that the master found himself unable to answer. The Academy's traditions, the galaxy's combat philosophies, the entire structure of martial hierarchy, suddenly seemed to hinge on the assumption that opponents would cooperate in their own defeat. The human's movement patterns weren't random, but followed a logic that the master was beginning to recognize. The creature was applying every technique it had observed during its weeks of cleaning duties, but instead of using the Krillians' precision to strike, it used their spatial awareness to avoid. Instead of channeling the Vorthok's rage into attacks, it borrowed their momentum for evasion. Instead of copying the Zephyrians' speed, it anticipated their targeting pattern. The human had learned to fight like every species in the Academy, by learning to fight like none of them. The master paused in his assault, breathing heavily for the first time in several centuries. The human stood 3 feet away, completely unharmed, displaying the same mild interest it brought to everything else. Interesting, the master said. Thank you, the human replied. The assembled students watched in silence as their fundamental understanding of combat, hierarchy, and cosmic order underwent rapid disassembly. The creature they had dismissed as evolutionary inadequacy had just demonstrated something unprecedented. It had engaged the galaxy's most skilled warrior, without once attempting to hurt him. The ancient master straightened, his expression shifting from frustration to something approaching wonder. In 3,000 years of combat, no opponent has ever survived an exchange without attempting to strike back. I'm not your opponent, the human said. Then what are you? The human considered this question, with the same thoughtful attention it brought to all inquiry. I'm someone who cleans things. The master laughed, a sound that hadn't been heard in his chambers for longer than most civilizations had existed. You have just demonstrated the most advanced combat technique in the galaxy, and you describe yourself as maintenance staff. I demonstrated the most advanced survival technique, the human corrected. There's a difference. The ancient master had spent 3 millennia searching for a student worthy of his knowledge. He had rejected applicants from every species, dismissed creatures with legendary reputations, turned away beings whose natural advantages made them living weapons. He had maintained his standards through the rise and fall of galactic empires, waiting for someone who understood that combat wasn't about demonstrating superiority, but about preserving what mattered. The Academy teaches that combat prowess determines cosmic hierarchy, the master said. You have just proven that assumption false. The human shrugged. Maybe the Academy should reconsider its teaching methods. The assembled students began to murmur among themselves, processing the implications of what they had witnessed. The creature they had used as a benchmark for inadequacy had just redefined their understanding of adequacy. The species they had dismissed as evolutionary failure had demonstrated evolutionary success of a completely different kind. The ancient master walked to the chamber's center and knelt before the human, performing the formal gesture of teacher acknowledging student. The sound of several hundred alien jaws dropping simultaneously created a brief acoustic phenomenon that physicists would later struggle to explain. I have found my student, the master announced. The human looked around the chamber, taking in the assembled students, whose worldview had just been quietly revolutionized, then looked back at the ancient master. Does this mean I get to keep cleaning things? The master, among other responsibilities. The Academy's hierarchy didn't collapse immediately. Structures built on millennia of tradition require time to properly dismantle themselves. But the process had begun, initiated by a creature whose greatest strength was its complete lack of the strengths everyone else valued. The human returned to its quarters that evening, where it resumed the same routine it had followed for weeks. The only difference was that now, instead of being invisible, it had become impossible to ignore. The Academy would need time to adjust to the reality that its most advanced student was also its most humble. The ancient master returned to his chambers, where he began planning curriculum for the first time in 3 centuries. Teaching someone who had learned to fight without fighting would require techniques that hadn't been invented yet. The cosmic joke, as it turned out, was that the galaxy's most sophisticated combat institution had been conquered by someone who had never tried to conquer anything at all. The universe, displaying its characteristic sense of humor, had arranged for strength to be redefined by someone who had never claimed to possess it. In the Academy's betting pools, the odds on the human's continued presence were quietly adjusted to reflect new reality. The creature wasn't going anywhere, and somehow that changed everything.